What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Microcast. I'm your host, TJ David.
And I'm Zoe Rome.
Along with Zoe Rome.
Yeah.
We're back.
We're back. We took a little break for you to do your Western States boot camp. We'll go into that later. We'll talk about what makes a good boot camp, who it's a fit for, and what exactly you did. But first, we have some housekeeping to attend to.
Yeah. If you guys are curious about coaching, but you don't feel like you're totally ready to commit, if you think you'd benefit from a community of like-minded athletes, we have a program that's meant just for you. This is for the community-oriented athlete. It's called the Foothills Tier, and it's all about sharing in adventures, mutual support, and resources from the coaching community. You can join our community roundtables, which happen twice a month.
Those are great because you get to connect one-on-one with different coaches. So you can talk with our schemo coach, our marathon expert, our para-Olympic coach, different coaches who provide different levels of input and expertise. It could be nutrition, it could be mental performance. That's a great way to get to connect one-on-one without having to open your wallet a bunch of times, without having to pay a ton of money. And you also get to connect with other athletes. So I think those are a huge, huge, huge benefit that we give Foothills Tier athletes and all athletes on our team.
Yeah, and you can, meet and interact with almost 200 members of the Microcosm team.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. There's so many folks probably in your neck of the woods that you could meet with, train with, and connect with. So Foothills 10, that's your discount code for $10 on this service.
Yeah, I'll drop to the link to that sign up into the show notes and into YouTube, but that's a really great level of service. If you're an athlete who's curious about coaching, but you're just not totally sure when you want to get started or what coach you would like to work with, or if you currently have a training plan that you've printed off and you just want a little bit of feedback on that, you can still get in touch with our coaches, come to those community calls, and you can get one-on-one calls with a coach at an additional cost. So that's a great way for you to dip your toe into the Microcosm waters.
Microcosmswag.com, MICROSMSWAG.com. That's where you can purchase that and get connected with the community.
Yeah. Another way to connect with us is to follow us on YouTube. We upload all of these videos there, in addition to a really fun introductory get to know the team call that we recently uploaded. So that's a great resource for folks. Another thing that's coming up is I'm hosting a camp and run in Leadville, Colorado, June 21st through 23rd with Runners for Public Lands. This is an all sort of ability levels camp where we're going to camp out in a really fun group campsite in Leadville. We're going to learn about trail stewardship. I'm going to lead some really fun group runs, sort of like an intro to mountain running. If you've been wanting to dip your toe into those waters, this is going to be a really fun and community-oriented way to do that. And we're going to do trail work. We're going to learn about the environment. We're going to learn about inclusivity. And we're going to have amazing coffee provided by 0 Days Leadville. We're going to have pizza from High Mountain Pies. You get to hang out with me. And we're just going to have a really good time. And this is only $43. That's a ridiculously good deal.
Wow.
You can sign up at runnersforpubliclands.com. And yeah, definitely do that because there's only about 15 spots left.
Nice. Runnersforpubliclands.com, microcosmswag.com.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Come hang out with us IRL. Join
Yeah.
the community. All right. I think it's time for some potting.
Little hot or not?
Little hot or not. How are you feeling in your, for heat training? I think that's really great training to assess if something is hot or not.
Yes.
You've been doing your sauna training, great time to reflect on if something is hot or not. I know you'll have a take on this one, bucket hats.
Bucket hats are hot.
Yeah, tell me why.
Because I don't get sunburned.
Yeah, when did you start experimenting with the bucket hat?
I feel like it was your Western States year. Yeah. I just was like, wow, how did I not discover this amazing coverage?
It's great for someone of your complexion.
Yes, if you're extremely pale.
But it was also the year that Jim Walmsley won. No, actually, Adam Peterman won that year. He wore a bucket hat.
Did he wear a bucket hat?
Yeah,
Ooh,
the year before Jim
hot.
Walmsley won in a bucket hat.
That's hot as
Yeah,
well.
Jim Walmsley in a bucket hat is hot.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
I like a bucket hat when I'm not running, but I feel like I look really silly in bucket hats. I feel like I can't pull it off. I don't have the same swag that you do.
I mean, it's just you look kind of, everybody does, looks kind of silly,
Yeah, but I have like giant curly hair, so wearing a bucket on my head with just like 12 inches of extremely curly hair and bangs looks like it's a look.
It's
for me.
practical.
Yeah.
It's very practical.
Yeah.
And you know what is great about the bucket hat?
Yeah.
It becomes like a literal bucket when you're grabbing water out of a stream
Yeah.
and dumping it all
On
over yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you get like 2-3 times the volume of water.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So you are very into the exceptionally wet bucket hat.
Yes.
More wet, more coverage, 5 stars.
Yeah, I mean, this bucket hat that I have, it is supposed to keep you cooler. I'm not sure if it really does. It's made by a company called Mission. They sent me a bunch of cooling products last year that I've kind of been testing out, and I actually really like this hat.
Are you going to wear that bucket hat for Western states?
Definitely.
That's going to be your headwear of choice?
I think so, at least for the hot parts of the race.
Yeah.
Although I will say, when you get hot, sometimes having anything on your head makes you hotter.
Yeah.
So there are moments where I do just take the hat off and just run with nothing on my head because, yeah. Cooling.
Man, I can't even imagine what having a cool head would feel like.
You could probably go with a little bit of a haircut.
I am getting my haircut. I actually did recently get an undercut. I was inspired by my friend Ellie Pell. I got like the bottom part of my head shaved, and it's been amazing. And I still feel like I have too much hair, even with an undercut.
Couldn't tell.
I know.
Couldn't
There's
tell.
still plenty of hair left. Great. Okay. Hot or not, ankle socks. And when you say ankle sock, like, are we talking mini crew? You're talking like above the ankle. How high?
I'm talking about.
Like midway up the calf to the knee?
Well, that's a high sock.
That's a high sock.
High sock is, it covers the ankle completely.
Okay.
Ankle sock exposes the ankle. It's cut at the ankle.
I don't like that. Ugh. I'm sort of pigeon-toed, so I kick my ankle bones a bit when I run. I like having a little bit of coverage. Also, just for tan line consistency, I'm dedicated to the mini crew. You do a full crew sock, I've noticed.
I'm dedicated to the high sock.
You like the crew sock.
Tan line all the time, all year.
This is true. Actually, you're not wearing socks right now, but whenever we go somewhere nice, you'll fully wear a high technical crew sock with Birkenstock sandals.
Gotta keep the feet happy.
You look like a German tourist at all times.
Yeah, and I look good.
So,
Are you embarrassed?
Yes, 'cause everywhere we go, you wear jorts with high socks and Birkenstock sandals.
I mean, the reality is, if I wasn't gonna wear socks, it would still look like I'm wearing socks, because the tan line is so bad.
But like, you gotta just expose your feet to the world sometimes.
I disagree. That's a good way to get a sunburn on your feet.
You're not gonna get a sunburn when we're going out to dinner.
We'll
Be going to a nice place, and you look like you're in line for tickets at the Louvre.
Business on the top, runner on the bottom.
You look runner on the top all the time. I
No,
disagree.
that's on
There's
the
no
bottom.
business element.
There's a business. I usually wear a collar.
You wear a technical collar.
Yeah, because I sweat.
My God. It's all performance fabrics all the time over here.
Yeah, why not?
Oh my God.
Smart.
It's embarrassing.
Ankle socks, hot or not. Stay on topic
It's
here.
but it's not hot. Okay, so hot for running, but then like for the rest of your life, like have some pride.
Nah, cold. Not hot.
God.
The tall sock offers protection.
From what?
Rocks.
When we're going out to dinner, though.
Toe stubs.
Toe
You never know
stubs.
what you're gonna hit.
The only difference between you and toe chaos is like a thin layer of like technical fabric.
This isn't a fashion critique. This is about technical sportswear and using it in training.
I'm concerned by how much your sportswear has infiltrated the rest of your life. I feel like we're 1 degree away from you, like, going to a nice dinner wearing a wet bucket hat and a running vest.
All right, I have a little pride in myself.
A little.
Just enough.
Okay, great.
Just enough, We
Okay.
live in a town of 6,000 people. I can
I know.
wear my tall socks into basically any place.
Do you
and
do
it's fine.
jazz shows with like tall socks?
What, I wear pants at my gigs.
But
don't
you're
wear
wearing
shorts to a
tall-
gig. God. It's like Pat Metheny in the 1980s. It's way too much thigh.
It's a lot of thigh. I like a little thigh in my jazz musicians.
It's too much. It's too much.
Oh gosh, this is a tough one. Oh, white shorts?
White shorts, hot or not?
No, man. That's like there, but for the grace of God, go I. That is courting disaster.
You better have.
Never. I've never once trusted myself enough to wear white shorts. Like, even in daily life, I'm not buying. I own one pair of white pants, and I rarely use them just because it's like, well, that's one more day out of my life where I'm scared of marinara sauce. I'm just like, I'm a messy person, you know? I need dark fabrics at all times. I mean, like, looking at my pants right now, I definitely see mustard and toothpaste. Actually, I'm not even sure if that's mustard. It could be harissa mayo. But, like, there's 2 visible stains on my current pants.
White shorts. It's a statement. It's a confidence.
I guess the statement is I trust my sphincter.
I have no issues on my GI map.
Yeah. I have a clean, like, I'm a god. I can eat anything.
I'm cold on white shorts.
Yeah, I'm cold on white shorts. That's a terrifying thought. Jeez.
All right, no days off, hot or not?
Not. You know, so training without resting is like eating without digesting. If you're not taking rest days or adaptation days, as I like to call it with my athletes, you're not adapting to the training that we're giving you. So it's really silly, right? Like, you're not benefiting from the work you're doing. I guess if you want to just work really hard and not get better, but also really increase your chance of a bunch of really tough, like, metabolic, hormonal, physiological, and even mental health issues, like, sure, don't take rest days, but that's, I mean, you gotta. Like, there's just, you know, I know it looks good on a poster, but I guess an even better poster would be rest plus stress equals adaptation. Because without that rest, the stress is just not gonna be productive.
Yeah, and I like to see athletes just take a day where they're not doing something training related, where they're not thinking about
don't exercise.
They're not thinking about their
I don't want to
training.
see power yoga. I don't want to see a big hike. I don't even want to see, like, logging a bunch of walks. That can sometimes concern me. So I'm just like, yo, are we like are we clinging a little too tightly to movement? Are we able to take a day
I think there's
where
no
we're
question
not
there.
quantifying movement?
We're hanging on too tightly.
Yeah.
We need to loosen that grip.
Yeah. I like to take my rest days as, like, I do not engage with training.
Exactly.
Like, sometimes I'll do yoga just for the joy of, like, kind of stretching things out and making my body feel good. But I don't track anything. I don't record anything. And the full emphasis of that day for me is on adapting and resting and taking that mental space as well.
Yeah. I love to just do things other than training.
Yeah.
Gosh. It's so great to
I
live
feel
a
like
full life.
if you feel that you don't need rest days, you are not training hard enough.
If you feel like you don't need rest days, you're not training hard enough.
Yeah. You need to want to, or like, if you feel that you don't need to rest, I think you're likely not training very well.
Or you're succumbing to a never enough mentality.
Or there's some deeper mental health issues that would probably be best addressed with a trained professional who's able to help you better assess why you feel that you are not worthy of rest or really need to control your emotions via exercise.
I love a good rest day. I'm here to
I know, like, that's always like a
spread
big
that message.
red flag for, like, taking on, like, I will not work with athletes who do run streaks because, like, a lot of times it's just indicative that they need a level of help beyond what a coach can offer.
Agreed. All right, let's get into the body of conversation today. We got the partner race swap, as usual.
Woo!
And then we're talking about specific training. And how specific should that training be?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited for this because I feel like a lot of times we get athletes who, you know, they sign up for a race. They want to immediately make sure that everything they do is, like, step for step matched with whatever their A race is. And it's not always a good use of time and energy.
Agreed.
So, partner race swap, TJ, one of the reasons we took last week off is we were traveling back from Auburn, California, because you took 3 days to go project or sort of like section up the Western States Endurance Run course. How was it? Did you have a good time? What did you think? What were your impressions of the Western States course?
What were my impressions? Oh man. This is so loaded because I feel like people have.
Because your impression was holy shit.
Yeah, I mean there was a lot going on. I'm not so sure how much to share. To be honest, people have really built Western states up as this like incredible race, and for a variety of different reasons. I think probably the number one reason is like the community aspect around it. Also, I believe it's the oldest trail race in the world.
The oldest continually run trail race in North America.
In North America. Wow. I mean, the history.
100-mile race. Dipsy is older.
Okay. Well, we're getting some of the facts right there.
And JFK is older. It's the oldest continually run 100-mile trail race in North America. Indigenous people have been, running trails for centuries, long before we, invented ultra sign up and whatnot.
Good point. Good point.
Not a lot of qualifiers there, but it's still very cool and very old.
So I was a little underwhelmed by the beauty of the course.
Huh.
I didn't think it was that spectacular.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm not afraid to say this. I feel like my heart is really in the big mountains, and this is definitely not big mountain environment.
Well, you didn't see the first 50K, which
True.
is in the Alpine.
True. And I leave my heart also open to experiencing that part of the course.
Yeah, I mean, the way I kind of think about it, it's sort of like the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. You're not going to Cooperstown for the views, you're going to Cooperstown for the history. And this is sort of our Cooperstown. Is it the most visually stunning 100-mile course? Probably not. I mean, it's maybe prettier than Leadville. Like, Leadville also, I feel like, is sort of overhyped in terms of how beautiful the course is.
100%.
It's the history. It's the story we tell ourselves about the history, too.
Yeah, so I was definitely checking in with myself around that narrative. I think especially on Friday, checking out the canyons and not having an opportunity to really do that in an efficient way, having to kind of do that the hard way. That was
did double
eye-opening.
Reverse canyons, parking at Michigan Bluff and then running it out and back because we weren't able to get to Robinson Flat. And that's an amazing way to break the seal on that course.
Yeah, and I mean, it was like a relatively hot day, but not a hot day
Well,
for
we also,
Western
so we had
states.
tried to go to Robinson Flat, so we didn't start our 20-mile double canyon adventure until like 10:30 a.m.
It was
That
tough.
was a lot of mental resilience was built.
Right, and I think that, that's kind of the point of these boot camp weekends. It's not just, there's some important stuff around, like, reconning the course and getting familiar with, like, the terrain and then, seeing all that, but it's also about, the stress that you're trying to accumulate. So, like, getting off a plane and then the next morning, I mean, literally getting in at, like, 8-9 o'clock at night, and then the next day turning it around, and I did a marathon on Friday with 7,500 feet of vert.
We blew the quads on day one.
I mean,
Quads were blown. Quadsplosion.
I felt and I was happy with how I ran the last 6 miles of the day, but boy, it was really hard, and I think that's what you're looking for. I mean, certainly, like when I use boot camp style training with my athletes, and this is typically for 50-mile or greater distances, somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks out from an A race, we're gonna have like a really big high stress weekend to try to mimic some of like the actual stress that you'll feel on race day, but in a little bit safer environment. Like, you're not gonna run 100 miles to race 100 miles,
Right.
but you can do 70 miles on the course in 3 days, like I did, and get a little bit of a feel for what it's going to be like. And I will say my expectations were low after Friday. Friday really kicked my butt.
Yeah.
And it was nice that, like, my only job during this time was basically to run and recover.
Yeah.
Because, like, that's all I had to
break
give.
down what a day in the life of TJ doing a boot camp looks like. Like, how do you get the most out of it? is boot camp something, do you have to always do it on the race course that you're racing? And is this something that you need to take time off work for? Can you do this like while doing other stuff? Walk me through that.
Well, I think it's different for each athlete, obviously. But typically, you would do it on the course if you can. If you don't have time, you would do it on as similar to race profile as possible. So when we talk about specific training later in the call, that's trying to mimic the elevation gain and loss per mile as you would see. I like athletes, if they're not able to get on the actual course, to target the hardest parts of their race profile for boot camps. So really trying to mimic like what they perceive is going to be the most difficult, cruxiest parts of the course. That way that they're getting that high stress. Because these are such large days, like I did almost 27 miles day one, then I did 20 miles day two, and a little over 22 miles day three. So it's obviously like, a lot of volume.
Right.
It was like 5.5 hours, 3.5 hours, 3.5 hours, or something around there. And so like when you're doing something so high stress, you absolutely need to limit the other stresses you have going on. This kind of stuff isn't really ideal if you also have to work an 8-hour workday. If you need to kind of plan this out strategically, which is why with a lot of my athletes, I give that 4 to 6 week window for these. So we can try to find a weekend or a 3-day stretch. This could be 2 or 3 days, but try to find that stretch where it's like we can limit other stresses. This is where
you don't have to go run a marathon and then like coach your kid's soccer team in a tournament all day.
Right. Or for me, I don't have to go run and then check logs or do the training and then do a bunch of hour-long calls with athletes. It's just, that would be inappropriate. Like I would be doing my athletes a disservice if I was doing that.
Yeah,
I was
cognitively,
crushed.
you were impacted.
I was deeply impacted.
I was like, man, I don't know if this guy's good to drive.
Reducing those stresses as best you can is really important because this is all about the training. This is one of those moments where, you do this in support of an A race. This is one of those rare moments in a year where, you purposefully prioritize the one thing in service of the outcomes you want, which is to run a really great, informed, well-trained for race. So that's what we did. And I will say, like, I love boot camps. I think that they're really effective for athletes.
Who are they most effective for? Like, is it something, should beginners be doing it? Like, who should be doing a boot camp?
This is for advanced athletes, probably at least 3 years of training experience, have had multiple ultras.
Pretty injury resilient.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely recommend this for athletes that have A races that are 100 mile. Like, I don't think it's really helpful or necessary. I've never done one for a 100K. I will do like a peak weekend, but I'm not like taking off work and flying anywhere for 100K. But for Western states particularly, I think it's very helpful to get on the course for big 100-mile races. I think it's very helpful to get on the course if that makes sense for you and your life, but it's also not necessary if you can take 3 days off work to focus on doing higher volume and emphasizing recovery on similar terrain. That's ideal. Like if you're in Florida and you're trying to do a flat boot camp to train for Leadville, that's not very helpful. But if you're able to get on trail and just really focus on getting volume and getting on terrain that as best as possible mimics the elevation you're going to be doing, that's ideal. You also really want to be trialing your nutrition and your hydration as much as possible.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one of the greatest things that you can learn from doing one of these camps is how well you're able to run actually, and for how long you can run so well on tired legs.
Right. That was something we were both really impressed by, is when we woke up the day after doing double reverse canyons, we were both pretty sore. We were domsing pretty hard. Then we went out and I ran 16 miles. And how many miles did you run the second day?
20.
20. We were both able to run and move quite well, even on sore and tired legs. Yeah. And that's sort of the idea, is functional overreaching.
Right. And practicing, for me, it was a lot about practicing, accepting that you're going to have to run like this and feel like this at Western States, because after those first 60 miles, the course is really nice.
Yeah,
It's
very runnable.
really runnable. And, you know, if I hadn't really practiced that, I think I wouldn't specifically know what I was about to get myself into.
Yeah.
And just like, you really have to race this race in a way that supports being able to continue to run those last 40 miles, because I mean, there's a few very steep climbs, but they're really short. And other than that, it's rolling and predominantly downhill. So if you can't run on tired legs on those sections, you're just losing so much time. So it's great to see that.
When should athletes think about building a boot camp into their training?
Again, I think 4 to 6 weeks out from an A race. I do these high stress weekends with experienced athletes who are racing 50 miles or more.
Yeah.
I think for the longer stuff, like 100K that maybe runs more like a 100-miler or a 100-miler, you could do a 3-day. For most athletes, it's going to be a 2-day. For really advanced athletes, we'll do a 3-day. And that 3-day is generally for 100-milers because it really helps you concentrate stress in the training and mimic the durability, the resilience, the mental toughness that you need to have to be able to run well in the later stages of those long races.
Cool.
Yeah. I think on the very opposite end of that spectrum, short races.
Short races,
as effective training. You raced a local event.
I did my first race since the Run Rabbit 100 in September. Sometimes we call this a rust buster. I did a lot of ultra races last year, which was really fun, but I think I learned all that I needed to learn from doing. How many 50 milers did I did?
Too many. I think you did 3.
I did 4. I did 5 races that were 50 miles or longer
last year. Oh god.
And that's
over racing.
Ding,
ding, ding.
There was only one race that I regretted, and that's fine. But I'm trying to have a more balanced approach this year and be a bit more strategic in my build-up. And so I signed up for a new event that we sponsored locally, the Mount Sopris Runoff 25K. And honestly, that was pretty intimidating. I usually don't race that fast. Also, I had done the majority of your Western States boot camp with you, so I trained through this race rather than doing like a very specific taper. I did do a little bit of a taper. I ran 5 miles of strides the day before this race, so it's not like I did like a long run and then raced
Did you do a
25K.
workout?
I did do a workout.
Wow, even after a high volume week, so you were functionally overreaching.
I was functionally overreaching, but it felt functional. And I raced this 25K at the tail end of a 75-mile week. But I felt good. Like, I felt really high energy. I didn't feel like I was training through counterproductive fatigue, which was good, because that was kind of one of my concerns. Is like, oh boy, I just did an 85-mile week, then I'm racing a very short race next week. That could feel really tough. And it was tough, but it was tough like I was in control of the effort. The effort wasn't controlling me. So my goal with this was to really just race the whole thing hard and to not be comfortable for a single second. And success. It was very hard and very uncomfortable, and I actually really, really liked it. I think I told you in the days leading up that I was really nervous. I felt like I was getting really vulnerable because I usually race longer races that are a little bit slower. But that I knew I needed to do this to build fitness the way I wanted to. And I really made sure that I wasn't using this as a referendum on how my training was going, and really tried to approach it as something that I was thinking about was like any time I had the thoughts, I'm proving, I turned it to improving.
Oh.
Boom.
I love that for you, Zoe.
I know. I was running so hard that was like really the only thought I was able to have the whole race.
This has been months and months and months in the making for you.
But it's tough because like I like to compete and I am very competitive. And, it's tough to compete at an event that's not my strong suit, frankly. But also like I wanted to really use it as a good training day, but also not file it as just like, oh, whatever happens, happens. I'm just going out here to build fitness. I wanted to race and be competitive, and I got third, which was great. But it was really helpful because for 2 hours I just ran as hard as I possibly could, really focused on taking in fuel at a higher effort level, I ran my first ever race with a fuel belt as opposed to a vest. So that was informative for me as someone who usually likes to race with a vest, but has been trying to go a little bit faster and lighter in recent years. And really just do a higher level aerobic push, working on lactate shuttling and improving cardiac stroke volume.
Yeah, those are some of the benefits of doing these shorter, really high intensity races. Obviously, you're not going to be running this at 1 hour effort, but kind of
2 hour race.
2 hour effort. But being able to really maximize that, you're definitely going to be in that zone 3, probably pushing zone 4 at times on climbs.
According to my watch, which we tell people not to pay attention to, I was zone 4.
Zone 4, yeah. I mean, that feels...
So big grain of margarita salt on that one.
That feels right, you know, being in that critical power area where you're still able to effectively shuttle the lactate without building it up before all the systems shut down. But it's a really different, like, approach than the boot camp. Like,
Yes.
It's total contrast. Like, the boot camp, I was running so easy.
Yeah.
Like, and after a while, it just kind of feels moderate because you're so damn tired. Like,
Right.
It's just building totally different systems, but also supportive. Like, when you think about it, like, a good build might have some long runs with some intensity that kind of mimics a short race, or a good build might have a short race. Like, leading up to this, you know, I did do a really hard marathon as part of my training on tired legs.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, when you're thinking about, if you're a self-coached athlete and you're thinking about building out your own plan or your own training, you know, a short race can be a great way to get a really hard effort in, while also maybe, limiting some of the extra stress that would come from, like, a higher volume weekend doing, like, a boot camp or something like that.
I'm actually, for healthy athletes, I'm a really big fan of doing sub-marathon distances as training.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of folks don't race enough. If you want to get better, like, I would rather people do a few little checkpoint races building up to 100 miler than just go, like, from 0 to 100 miles. And I need to practice what I preach a little bit better. And I had such a great time at this race that I'll definitely be signing up for some shorter races in the future.
Nice. Yeah. Maybe, well, I was thinking about that Lead King Loop race that happens.
I've always wanted to do that one.
It's another local.
I feel like that one's in September usually, which is usually, I'm either like a week before I run a 100 miler or it's a week after.
Right. Bad timing. I've never had the timing for that one.
Some year I really want to do it. But I think, again, like, if you're an athlete who wants to do well at longer races, short races are an amazing way to build fitness and to also flex all the skills that you need on race day, to flex that fueling muscle, to flex that mental muscle, and to just get used to dealing with, like, the psychological impacts of racing, like jitters, anxiety. Exposure therapy is a hell of a drug when it comes to this stuff.
So, talking about race-specific training, we have the contrast between how specific my training was last 2 weekends ago now, I guess, at this point, and then how non-specific your last race was this weekend.
Right.
Being...
not 100-mile pace.
No, but also... both things can be true in the build-up for a race when used at the right time. How specific should an athlete's training be? I have some pretty hard and fast rules about this. I'm curious what your take is.
Yeah, so, for new athletes, the best thing is always just to get fitter, and your training really shouldn't be that focused on being specific. And that's one of the reasons we want, it's always frustrating when people come to us to train for a race and they're like, oh, I'm 12 weeks out or I'm 8 weeks out. And it's like, well, it's not a lot of time to do a whole lot of work. Data shows that for the first 12 months that athletes start training, they usually improve between 1% and 2% each month. So the best tool to have in your tool belt as you're training for a race is more time. You know, if you think about just adding one additional month of between 1 and 2% improvement, that is the best way that you can invest in your future success, is just to spend more time training, in terms of not like more time as in training volume, but more, I mean, yes, more abstractly, but like take more time out of the scale of your life to train for an event. And a lot of times I see athletes really hyperfixate on specificity before events to the detriment of their overall fitness and just mental health and overall well-being. And that's always frustrating. I think that more advanced athletes have more to gain from getting hyper specific and more specific. But I think, you know, newer athletes to intermediate athletes, generally your time and energy is going to be best spent getting fitter and recovering better.
Interesting take.
But again, like when we think about like how we structure training, something we talk about a lot is that your training is going to be more specific leading up to the event. So if you're running a steep race, you're going to see more emphasis on climbing closer to the race. If you're running a marathon, you're going to see more emphasis on marathon efforts in your workouts and long runs closer to the event. If we're 6 months out from a marathon, we're not going to be spending a ton of time at marathon effort in workouts and long runs. That's too specific. And it's going to be more impactful for us to train less specific energy systems like aerobic base building, working on VO2 max, just building overall fitness, improving our ceiling, raising our floor, rather than being hyper fixated on running specific paces. So we usually think about getting very specific 4 to 6 weeks before an event, whether that's a steep mountain ultramarathon or even a half marathon.
Interesting. I'll be transparent. I take a bit of a broader approach with this, and I definitely have more emphasis on specific adaptations for races. And I kind of,
but it depends on the ability level and experience of your athletes.
Of course, but I think that window, my window, always 8 to 16 weeks out from an A race. Sure. That's when we're going to make that shift.
I think it just really depends on the rate. Like if I have an athlete who's running like a trail marathon, I'm not spending 16 weeks hyper fixating on getting the same amount of vertical gain in their training as they're doing in the marathon. So yes, if I have an athlete doing a 100-mile race or even doing like Cocodona, all of this is really depends. My overall message is specificity is going to be the most impactful when it's layered over adequate training, preparation, and good fitness and health. And I see a lot of athletes focus on specificity to the detriment of the fundamentals. You've got to have the fundamentals, otherwise the specificity doesn't matter.
So and I definitely agree with that. I think that was really well said. But I think this is where the gray area is and where the coaching nuance exists in this. And obviously we haven't gone yet into why training should be specific and what the purpose is and all of that, which, I want to get into. But if you have an athlete who, say they're a beginner intermediate, maybe they've got 2 seasons or so,
2 years of consistent
training under their belt, honestly, that's still
solidly intermediate.
Solidly, I think a beginner intermediate.
I think that if you've been training consistently for a year, you're no longer a beginner.
All right, let's not get in the weeds on that. But say you've got that person who's about 2 years into the process. And they are stepping up in distance. Maybe they're doing a 50K for the first time. Okay. And so they've picked a 50K that has very specific demands. Let's say it's Speed Goat, a mountain race.
Okay. It's a high altitude, very steep ski resort 50K.
You're 2 years into the process. And with most folks 2 years into the process, we can say there's a lot more neuromuscular adaptations and running economy improvements that they could make. They're likely either their floor could come way up or their ceiling over time. They don't have a lot of relative race experience to begin with. 2 years, it's not a lot of time to be spending on the process yet. They also have, not a lot of cumulative time developing their aerobic system. 2 years, it's not that much. So where would you draw the line on practicality? Because to be successful in an A race, a 50K with specific demands, we do need to work on some of those things like, I don't know, uphill workouts or getting better at power
Yeah.
hiking? Like where
I
do you,
mean-
like, how do you find, like, I know what I do, but
Right.
how do you
this
find
would be
the
a
balance?
great place to do the microcosm drinking game, which is every time TJ or I say it depends, you take a swig of scratch electrolyte and hydrate. Because it depends, right? For this athlete, I'm like, how injury resilient are they? And I'm going to factor that into training. What sort of like, where did they live? Like, if this athlete lives in Florida, that's going to change how specifically I train them versus like if they live in Salt Lake City, I'm going to be like, yeah, let's go do the course. Or if you live in Colorado, I'm going to be like, yeah, let's go train on some ski resorts that have similar trails and similar trail feel. So it really depends on the athlete and sort of like what time they have available. Like if it's an athlete with a really flexible schedule, I'm going to suggest a different approach to training than if it's like a surgeon that has really, a different approach to their how I train with them. So all of that is to say, I mean, it really depends. But if this athlete is healthy, has a lot of time available to train, and lives in a place where they have access to race similar terrain, yes, I'm going to have them train fairly specifically.
Yeah. My approach isn't dissimilar. I like that you have a million disclaimers around
Right.
the individuality of this, because that's true. But I think for what I find to be most effective is you kind of take a balanced approach where the athlete still has so much to gain from workouts specific. Like when I say workouts, I mean the speed work, the workouts that are meant to increase fitness. The athlete has so much to gain from workouts on the broader side of things. So, for example, we're working on this specific system. Obviously those workouts get more specific to the energy systems used on that event the closer to
Right.
the race.
So
But
what is that-
I'm not going to do as many of those workouts on race-specific terrain or mimicking
Right.
race-specific demands. I'm going to leave, which I would do with an advanced athlete.
Right.
I'm going to leave that specific work, those nuances, off the table, because I think that gets a newer athlete into the weeds.
I think it gets people distracted, and again, the evidence
Exactly.
shows that your time and energy, and this is for all athletes, right? Like, sure, I could move to Leadville right now. That's actually not going to be that helpful when I can right now be improving my overall fitness and speed.
And then I'm going to use the weekends to really
Yeah.
get specific with terrain in the context of the long run, which is then using the energy system you're likely going to be using at the race,
Right.
feeling similar to the race, focusing on the nutrition you'd use during the race, the strategies that you'd use on race day. So it's kind of, for a lot of these, I guess, beginner intermediate athletes, it's going to be, more of a two-pronged approach.
Right.
in
That's one of the
training.
things I love about ultra marathon training is all training is specific, whereas aerobic base building is technically less specific for a half marathon because that's not explicitly the only energy system you're using. For an ultra marathon, you're aerobic the whole time.
Right.
So all training is specific.
Let's get into the purpose behind some more race-specific training and workouts, maybe for our advanced intermediates
Right.
and our elite athletes, our veterans.
So walk me through energy system specificity. Can you break that down for me? When we talk about energy system specificity, what does that mean?
Well, it means lining up the workouts you're doing, the speed work you're doing, and some of the efforts you're doing during your long runs with the actual energy systems you'll be using on race day. So
Right.
really, you just told everybody what it was.
Okay.
When you're running an ultra, you're running pretty much in zone 2 or lower. So a lot of the training you do should reflect that.
Yeah.
Now, there's going to be some nuance to that for advanced athletes who need to do more intense work to continue to build their aerobic systems. So I think, the purpose behind a lot of workouts that you might see if you're working with me is that those workouts are done on race-specific terrain. They might be done to mimic specific demands of the race, or the specific neuromuscular adaptations you need to run well, the specific demands from the muscular system in terms of power that you're going to need to generate at times in the race, and also the durability and the mental toughness. So there's a lot kind of going on there. But for example, if you're 8 weeks out from a marathon, newer athletes are going to be doing maybe more workouts at marathon pace, while advanced athletes are probably going to be doing more threshold work or 1 hour effort work.
To raise, so like your threshold is almost sort of like the cap on your aerobic base. So you want to it's like raising the ceiling.
Right. Well,
so you want to
that's
keep
exactly
raising
right.
the ceiling.
And then, honing the marathon effort over time.
Getting really comfortable with that uncomfortable pace.
So, being very specific and knowing the purpose and the intention behind those workouts, I think is really key.
What about when it comes to fueling and hydration?
I think this is kind of blanket for all athletes, but obviously, like when you're in that specific phase of training, generally like the specific phase is going to be shorter for shorter races and longer for longer races. So if you are running your first 100, you might do 16 weeks of specific training. And in that time, you would be working to improve how you fuel, how you hydrate, developing, very specific routines there and a specific schedule for those things, specific fueling that is going to work for you. Like every long run is focused on that in some part in order to support what you'll do on race day. And then after that, you also kind of couple that. You might have some long runs, back-to-back long runs that are used to help increase durability, fatigue resistance, get used to running on tired legs, and for metabolic adaptation, so increasing your ability to burn fat out there and utilize fat while running at a lower effort level. There is kind of a lot to all of this, which is really fun and exciting.
And also why you should probably work with a coach. Because again, I think the number one mistake I see athletes make is they go for the marginal gains and they get way too specific to the detriment of raising that floor.
Right. Yeah, totally. Like if your fitness isn't that great, doing uphill treadmill hikes.
If you're not in good shape or you're not healthy, like getting weird about your nutrition or doing a ton of sauna training or buying a hyperbaric chamber or an infrared sauna, none of that's going to be helpful if you're not as fit as you can possibly be.
Right. Totally.
So what kinds of workouts, like let's break it down by workout. How do you, when we think about, like a steep hikey race versus a faster flat race, how do you break down that specificity or how do you incorporate that specificity in workouts for athletes?
In speed workouts?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to be doing a lot of workouts that work those specific things that athletes need to be doing. So there'll be emphasis on the uphill and the downhill. I think something that a lot of coaches overlook is the importance of training for the downhill. No, it doesn't have a strong aerobic stimulus, but it is important for strengthening the legs and making you resilient to those downhills so you can continue to run well later in the race when all of that damage makes it harder to run and leads to a lot more walking. So I like to do, workouts that combine both of those things.
I love combo workouts.
Really specific, like hard uphill efforts on steep terrain, 12 to 15%, mimicking what you might see at the race, pushing the effort on those uphills. Again, like we're not in those situations, we're not going to be targeting the exact intensity that we're going to be using and the race. We might be doing that more on long runs and in easy runs, but on these workouts, we're really pushing the ceiling up and then we're challenging the athlete then to also be able to run downhill for recovery on that steep terrain. So getting some of that eccentric loading in. I like doing uphill like tempos that kind of push just a little bit beyond race pace with intentional downhill running after. You might see some of that in workouts too, but it's basically trying to mimic some of the things you might see on race day. Like if you need to get really good at grinding uphills, you better practice grinding uphills in your training.
Yeah. Speaking of grinding uphills, when do you incorporate uphill treadmill runs or hikes? Who are those beneficial for, and when should athletes deploy those in training?
I think, intermediate plus athletes can really benefit from uphill treadmill hiking, and eventually when you become more advanced and more economically efficient, you can start to kind of like switch that to from a hike to a run.
Yeah.
But I think that those are great. Like a lot of athletes can really.
What do those look like? How do you assign? Like how do you assign
hiking
those?
uphill on a treadmill.
Right. No, I know. Don't explain it to me. Explain it to the audience.
It feels obvious. Setting the treadmill to a steep grade, minimum 15%, and just hiking uphill 30, 40 minutes, depending on the athlete. Maybe it could be up to an hour. But working on uphill hiking form, working on getting used to hiking uphill. The steeper the treadmill goes for this, the better. You can work on form. And really, this is about neuromuscular adaptation. So hiking uphill is different than running uphill. If your race is steep, you're going to be hiking a lot. This is particularly good for athletes also who don't live in an area with a lot of steep terrain, so they can practice their uphill hiking. A lot of athletes don't train for the uphill hike because it's not as energy demanding, let's say, compared to running uphill.
Right.
But the issue there is like you are using different muscle groups. And so athletes who undertrain tend to get sore faster in races. And then that can lead to some tough outcomes if they haven't practiced using those muscles.
Right. So thinking even more specifically, along the lines of training for uphills, how specifically do you have athletes train for the terrain of their A event?
I have them train to run the same ratio of elevation gain and loss per mile at minimum on their long runs, and then on their weekday runs when possible. I think that this is really helpful for getting your structural system used to the demands. A lot of up and down that can take a toll on the body, especially those downhills.
Yeah. If you plan on hiking a lot of it, let's say you're running a steep 100-mile race, and you're going to be hiking a lot, should all of your runs be, how much should you train hiking? How specifically should you target that? And what should that look like over the course of a training week?
I would probably do 2 to 3 runs a week like that, at minimum the weekend runs, and then maybe an additional weekday run depending on time available.
Right.
Yeah. I also, a good training plan helps to maintain the work that you've done before. So if all of a sudden all of your runs are hiking and you're not running as much, not practicing running uphill,
lose fitness.
You're going to get slow.
You have to hike. Yeah, that's always the sort of, I think, the fine line is like you want to always be building fitness, which will help you hike faster. And if all you ever do is hike even quickly, you're not going to be getting as fast as if you are still emphasizing aerobic development, still emphasizing running economy, even in season, even leading specifically up to your race.
Well, we talked a little bit the call before or the one before that. I can't remember, but we talked about spring training a little bit and the importance of working on stuff there. That can really help set an athlete up well for some of these more specific workouts.
So for less experienced athletes, what should training specificity look like?
Rewind 10 minutes to what I talked about before. More generalized, long runs on specific terrain. If you're a volume, stress-limited athlete, maybe mixing in some specific cross-training. Could be that uphill treadmill, could be some biking. Making sure that volume stays high and really specifically correlating like a lot of the running you're doing to the energy systems you're using on race day. So It's a lot of zone 2, a lot of easy running with probably some strides and some hills to keep the ceiling high. Keep working on that speed long term.
Yeah. What about nutrition?
Again, it's the same focus on nutrition, making sure like if you're newer and you haven't done these longer efforts before, you absolutely have to be working on this every long run.
What does that look like?
300 plus calories an hour. You can refer to our podcast with Kylie Van Horn to get a good view on that. But we've also got a really great blog post, How to Fuel Like a Boss, microcosmcoaching.com, which kind of runs you through the 101 on how to get started with getting at least 300 calories an hour, making sure you are using electrolytes, at least 250 milligrams of sodium an hour, maybe considering that sweat test and the fluid loss test as well, so you can get more specific on that nutrition, a little less guesswork.
Yeah. So what should training specificity look like for more advanced athletes? And who are you thinking of when you think advanced athlete? Like what's the archetype here?
I think athletes with 3+ years of training experience can really benefit from workouts that start to actually mimic the specific demands of the race. So working specifically on durability, working specifically on the cruxier parts of the race, mimicking maybe the more difficult parts of the profile in workouts, not just in long runs, doing boot camps like we talked about.
That's
are going to be
something
really helpful.
I do with my more advanced athletes is I do a lot of combo workouts where I will either have them do hill strides or do intervals, and then I'll have them do either hill strides or intervals so that I can like bash their legs and then make them retain high output and turnover, or I'll make them, I'll fatigue them with high output and good turnover and then make them move well uphill, which sort of mimics the accumulated fatigue of longer events.
Yeah, and I think with advanced athletes as well that have had, racing history and workout history, you're also looking more at where are some of the smaller gains that I can be making.
Right.
That can be with trialing new types of nutrition. That can be doing boot camp weekends where we do these 2 to 3 day, what we talked about earlier in the podcast, with these really high stress weeks that are meant to put you under a lot of pressure and stress in order to help mimic what it'll feel like in that race so we can start to perform better and respond to those stresses in higher ways on race day. I think really the bread and butter for advanced athletes is going to be that combination of like a race specific workout on race terrain. Love seeing my advanced athletes do their workouts on trail if they can. And then the back-to-back long runs on the weekends.
And again, the best way to get ready for your A event is to simply start training sooner and to keep your base higher and to, sort of like fitness and consistency compounds. If you're able to stay consistent for years and years, you're always going to beat the guy who jumps in 16 weeks before and buys the hyperbaric sauna or whatever and gets fatted, quote unquote fat adapted and drinks adaptogenic milk or whatever. And so I just sort of wanted to end with, I think, a really succinct and good summation of this concept, which is Jason Koop's hierarchy of ultramarathon training needs. And we've talked about our own sort of hierarchy before. So the base of this pyramid is total volume of workload. So that's over years of training, right? Like you got to have that dialed in, and you need to have a high base of consistency for anything else to make sense and be impactful. On top of that, adequate rest. Very important. Your training only makes sense if you're recovering from it. On top of that is wholesome nutrition, mostly plants, potentially periodized. So again, we don't need to be getting super specific here and trialing adaptogenic milks and fairy powders. Eat well, eat enough.
No breast milk out there?
Oh my God.
No
Jesus
raw
Christ.
goat milk?
No raw, I don't think you
guys
need,
doing
I know,
now?
the Cocodona chat was wiling out with their milk trialing. But there is no nutrition.
Level 3 of Koop's hierarchy of ultra marathoning training needs.
It is simple. Wholesome nutrition, mostly plants. On top of that is high intensity training and distribution of training intensity. So again, having structured workouts and doing just enough high intensity training that you can progress and improve your biomechanics. This is level 4, by the way. I think I see a lot of people jump immediately to high intensity training and doing workouts. That only makes sense if you have good nutrition, good rest, and good volume. On top of that, hire a coach. Build the team. So get a PT, get a nutritionist, get a mental performance expert, build that team out. On top of that, train the gut. Again, getting a hyperbaric sauna and making sure that Mercury's not in retrograde, none of that's going to be helpful if your GI system isn't properly adapted for the stress of ultramarathon racing. On top of that is terrain-specific training. So that's talking about similar technicality and ascent and descent of terrain. On top of that is train for toughness. This is something we talked about a lot this winter, is you don't need to overemphasize getting mentally tough by going and training in snowstorms if getting mentally tough is going to happen to the detriment of quality training and substantial workload. Mental toughness is a thing, but it's not the only thing, and it's not the most important thing. On top of that is annual periodization. So having a structured training plan that takes into account your life, your training, and how to best progress towards a specific event.
And that's also having those built-in periods of extended rest.
Yes.
You talked about transition seasons in
And
a
when we
cast.
say extended rest, you're not resting. It's just intentionally reduced volume with the intention of sort of resetting for additional workload down the road.
That's exactly right.
We're not giving athletes 2 full weeks off. I mean, it depends on what event they just did, but we're not taking a month off of running just because we're tired or burnt out. If you feel that you need to take that much time off of training, it likely means you were overreaching in a way that wasn't as helpful leading up to your previous event.
Yeah.
So on top of annual periodization, phase periodization. So again, thinking of your training being structured in a way that makes sense across a 12 to 16 week cycle, maybe even an 8-week cycle, depending on the athlete. On top of phase periodization is training stimuli enhancement. This is the penultimate tip of the pyramid, and that's a lot of the stuff that we see athletes get held up on, which is things like doing, hiking the exact course that or like going to scout the course, doing sauna training, doing these like super sexy sort of things that actually don't end up being all that helpful. So that's training stimuli enhancement. And on top of that is the taper. So it's important, but only important in the context of if you have all of these things in alignment and covered. So again, all of this is to say that the most important thing you can do is train for longer and get fitter and recover better and eat better. And then if you're really nailing all of that, we can start to finesse going further up the pyramid, but none of that's going to be impactful or helpful if you don't have your fundamentals dialed. Work with a coach, build out your team. Don't stress about how many minutes you're spending in the sauna if you're not getting all of your runs done exactly as prescribed.
Nice. Nicely said. You did miss the tip of the pyramid.
I said taper.
You said taper?
Yeah.
I love a good taper.
Taper's the tip of the pyramid.
Can't wait to taper.
Yeah.
Still a few weeks away from that myself.
You're already excited.
Yeah.
Probably
I do have
means
a
the training is working.
solid down week next week, though, which
Nice.
will be awesome. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. If you've got questions for a future call, if you've got some hot or not topics, boy, we'd love to hear from you. microcosmcoaching@gmail.com, microcosm-coaching.com for all of your needs here on ultra running, trail running, marathon running, schemo coaching. We've got you covered. Check us out. We got some great blog posts on there. Like I mentioned, we've got 101 for fueling. I mean, this is one of our most read blog posts. We wrote that several years ago, and we update it based on the latest research as we go. So if you're looking for like the 101 on how to start training your gut for your next ultra, check that out.
All right. Thanks for tuning in.
Have a good one.